guys. How's Singapore for you guys?
Pretty good.
It's my first time here in 13 years, so it's changed a lot.
Oh, yeah, awesome. I think I think the best way to get started is just like with a quick intro. I can go first, and so I'm Rishabh. I'm one of the co-founders of Socket. So the last panel was about interop protocol, so that's like a good segue into Socket. But we're basically enabling cross-chain interop, and so basically 80 plus projects use us today to facilitate bridging of assets and data across these different chains and build like unique use cases, right? Like so as a quick example, AVO, which is an options protocol and has its own rollup, basically recently launched a deposit functionality and a bridge from all of these Arbitrum and Optimism and all of these L2s into AVO without any bridge fee, right? Like, so we've been like working on a lot of interesting use cases like these in the last 1 year, have facilitated like $4 billion in volume, like 3 million transactions. And yeah, I think like that's like a very, very quick intro about Socket. Sunny, would you like to go first?
Sure. Sure. Hey guys, my name is Sunny. I'm one of the co-founders of Osmosis. It is a DEX, cross-chain DEX built as its own app chain. So I think we take a slightly different approach to many multi-chain or cross-chain products where instead of like having our application spread across many, many different chains, we're focused on building one chain that houses our product, but then is connected to the rest of the world. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about it, but let's just go on with the intros, I guess.
Zaki Munyan. Sommelier is a system for building adaptive DeFi strategies. Our sort of self-governance and checks and balances layer that like makes it safe to do this is built as an app chain, but our products are primarily on Ethereum. But then we've been working also heavily on composability of those products on app chains. So like we're bringing real yield ETH, which is one of our larger strategies, to Osmosis soon. We are also we've been like very deep in the process of integrating Axelar to make strategies available on L2s. We are looking at IBC-based strategies as Cosmos chains, as DeFi matures on Cosmos. There are some interesting opportunities. Yeah, so 2 years into building an application on cross-chain stuff, and then I effectively worked on IBC from like 2014 until it shipped in 2021. So also that.
Hey, I'm Akshay. I'm one of the founding members at LeFi. So LeFi is a one-stop solution for all projects, all developers building torsion applications. We aggregate all DeFi liquidity in just one API. We abstract away all the complexities of like hundreds of bridges out there. And yeah, so we're also one of the contributors at MMA that is built by Uniswap. And yeah.
Awesome. I think while we had a great panel about like interop, right, and basically spoke about like, okay, how do we connect chains, right? But I think what I would love to start with is what does cross-chain products even mean, right? Like the topic of this panel, right? Like because connecting chain is something else, and then like building on top and like really building something cross-chain is like a different thing in altogether, right? Like, so how do you guys think about cross-chain applications and especially, I mean, Osmosis and like Sommelier, you guys like at there, you have been, working with all of this, right? Like, so yeah, would love to know about your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess how we see cross-chain products is, currently, let's go specifically from the DEX's perspective, because that's what I focus on. Most DEXs out there today very much feel like utilities of the chain that they're built on, and they kind of don't really have their own direct customer acquisition flow, and they kind of be like, if you look at something like Uniswap, it's like, oh, it relies on the L2 or the L1 or whatever chain it is to be the customer acquisition thing, and then they just want to be like, oh, we're going to be the primary DEX there, which is fine, but then you kind of like lose a lot of control of your destiny. Like, I think in a lot of ways, Trader Joe has built a superior product to a lot of other like EVM dexes, but like it's fundamentally like limited by like how fast Avalanche can grow. Our view is that like by building a cross-chain centric product, we want to move farther up the stack, somewhere similar to like Coinbase or Binance, where they're not part of anyone else's ecosystem, but rather it's like you can go to Coinbase to buy Bitcoin and ETH and Sol and AVAX and everything, and you want this level of like neutrality where you're not part of anyone's ecosystem, but you're Switzerland and everyone brings their liquidity to you, and you're seen as this like fair place where people can participate in the entire crypto economy rather than these like segmented ecosystem specific economies.
So it's very much like it's very much like a Binance or a Coinbase, like you mentioned, but like the on-ramping and off-ramping experience is where like the cross-chain comes in, right? Like where you can just like transfer to an address and be on Binance, right? And then like transfer to an address and like just off-ramp out of it. And this is like something that something similar that we're doing with Evo as well, right? So it just feels very much like a real sex-like experience, basically. Yeah, Zaki, would you?
Absolutely. So the motivation for Sommelier was, okay, in the same way that like you look at centralized exchanges, the other big part of past crypto cycles has been sort of like CDFI. You deposit your funds in some sort of centralized in a centralized entity. That entity goes out and deploys it in DeFi. You earn the yield. And essentially, every one of those CDFI entities lost all of their customers' money, more or less. That was, and when we started Sommelier, we were like, okay, you can like see this coming from 1,000 miles away. Like, this is like in the same way that like you saw centralized exchange or the early iterations of centralized exchanges like routinely lost all of their users' money. CDFI was going to lose all of its users' money. So like, how do you build something that is gives that user experience? Because that user experience of, oh, I want to like interact with all of these DeFi protocols by myself is awful. So what you want is something that gives that user experience of, I want to like access DeFi, but I don't want to manage every individual component of it myself. But build a system that cannot rug. And I have never seen a way of doing that purely on top of Ethereum. I think there was you needed to combine things you could only build on top of like an app chain with the power of Ethereum DeFi, the liquidity of Ethereum DeFi. So that inherently said, okay, let's build a cross-chain application. That was super hard 2 years ago. All of our strategies thus far have also, each strategy is only linked to one chain, but obviously there's like a use case for like having a strategy that manages assets across multiple chains. All of that is getting like both what we've been learning from like having the software in production, having significant amounts of value pass through it. We're starting to learn more confidence in the system that might get us to the point where like we can have more and more complex cross-chain interactions. And there's just like all kinds of interesting challenges that need to be managed and mitigated. Like, for instance, if you're building an application on Ethereum that interacts with a Sommelier asset, you can, like, the smart contract can easily and trivially access the redemption value of that asset using the ERC 4626 standard. But there's no way of ERC 4626ing across chains. So we've been building infrastructure for that kind of thing, so that like we've been contributing to oracles. We've been working. We have like a TWAP contract that can be updated by a Chainlink oracle, and it's interesting like how heterogeneous our surface area of messaging protocols are. Is like, I think probably by the end of the year we'll probably have like our own bridge, IBC, Axelar, CCP/IP from Chainlink, all in some piece of our stack.
Love it, love it. Akshay, would you like to?
Yeah. So cross-chain products are kind of like, internet products, right? So it's kind of like email. You're connecting things from connecting different servers on different networks. So now in this case, like one of my favorite cross-chain applications have actually been familiar, because not everything can be done on chain, right? So you can't actually run strategies on Ethereum. It's very expensive to run these strategies on Ethereum. So you do need chains, you do need off-chain computation. That's why CD5 was such a big thing. And like, of course, because of trust assumptions, like because of security reasons, they all went down. But Sommelier is solving something like that. And since you need like off-chain components, these off-chain components don't have to be centralized components. They can be decentralized components like Sommelier, and they can be a different chain through which you can control the strategies on a different chain. So I feel like more and more cross-chain projects are gonna just come up as these cross-chain infrastructures become a lot more robust, and we see a lot more standards in this cross-chain infrastructure. I think like one of the exciting things that I'm excited about have been intents, right? So intents can also be on a single chain as well. So Anoma, which is building an intent marketplace or intent language, it'll also be a different chain. They're gonna have to communicate with the source chain where the users want to execute these intents, or to even validate these intents as well. So yeah.
We're going to derail the whole conversation with an intent stock.
Yeah, I think we should come to that towards the end. But yeah, I think cross-chain applications for me are like more about chain abstraction from every layer, right? Like, and it starts from the developer layer, where like a developer should be building without actually thinking about deploying on thousands of different chains, right? Like right now we are like, we have 100, 150 chains, whatever, but like we'll go into a world of 1,000 chains, and no developer can actually like deploy on every single chain out there, right? Like, or just connect their own application with every different chain, right? Similarly, a user can't, let's say, switch between hundreds of different RPCs, right? Like that's like not really possible to do, right? Like, so I think, and even at yield level, for example, right? Like no user can like even think about accessing yield on like just 5 or 7 different chains, but like they have to see it like completely at a abstract, with like an abstraction point of view, right? Like, so I think with all of these things that are basically evolving, we are going into like this chain abstracted world, right? Like, and I think like Osmosis, for example, specifically is one of the first examples of like what that future can look like, right? Like where you're just like coming in, using an application, you can come in from wherever, you can go out wherever, and just like interact with it, right? But yeah, how do you guys think about like liquidity, the relationship between liquidity and cross-chain, right? Like there are different, you guys like mentioned about liquidity in different shapes and forms, right? Like, but I think like cross-chain is very proportional to liquidity, at least at this point in time, right? Like, so how do you think that relationship is, and how will it change over time?
Yeah, I think liquidity, the relation with liquidity and cross-chain is mostly has to do with like the latency of the movement of assets, right? The reason I think liquidity is somewhat sticky is because it's not easy to move assets like between chains, especially like mainnet Ethereum. I think like moving assets from L2s onto Osmosis is very fast. But the problem is, because of Ethereum's weird choices on like for consensus protocols, you have this still like really long finality periods, which makes that like transfers take a while. But I think that with things like Circle's CCTP, and you have people building more like fast transfer protocols like Skip and Squid and stuff, like as the speed of bridging becomes faster and faster, I think we're going to see liquidity become less and less sticky as well. And also I think it'll also just like won't matter where the liquidity is, because like, let's say on Osmosis, like what we're going to be doing is like, in a way, turning, like I said, our thesis on Osmosis is that we want to provide the best user experience for how people onboard into crypto. And that involves things with our front end, involves things with our chain, about like with account abstraction stuff. But like if someone wants to buy, we have AVAX on Osmosis, but we don't have that much liquidity on the chain. And if someone wants to buy a large trade, or like a larger position of AVAX, we should allow them to do that from Osmosis, but we should be able to dispatch that trade to Avalanche using like something like Axelar's GMP, swap on Trader Joe, but then make sure they get the AVAX back on Osmosis. So basically like treating Osmosis as the wallet for users and like make it so they don't have to go have a MetaMask and like sign transactions anywhere else, but we can tap into that liquidity from throughout DeFi. It doesn't all have to be on the Osmosis chain necessarily.
Nice, yeah. So it's like chain abstraction again, but for liquidity, basically in this case.
Yeah, it's like I think the difference here for us is like we see it as our chain is the account hub for our users. Trying to like make them manage accounts across 50 different blockchains doesn't work, and it's like the job of the chain to figure out how to just like tap into liquidity that is elsewhere.
I think like in one of the things that Sommelier's strategists have become effectively as experts in liquidity, both on just like on-chain liquidity, market structure of things like ETH liquid staking tokens, like how lending protocols work. We end up having to build just like an enormous understanding of all of these things. And one of the things that we feel that we're really observing is like a missing piece of sort of like cross-chain application building is generally like there's been a lot of talk about there's a lot of talk about like like people who will like market make across chains, and we see sometimes very surprising sophisticated bot activity on things like Cosmos. Like sometimes I'll see like a bot that'll make like like half a dozen IBC transactions to like complete a cycle among multiple dexes on Cosmos to extract like literally dollars of profit. And I'm like, who did this? Like, who wrote the bot? But on the whole, what we observe is just that there is like a lack of sophisticated market actors that really understand cross chains, that have the tooling and like the data and the intelligence and the analysis stuff. We spend a lot of time talking about how sophisticated like MEV searchers are, and it makes everything sound like but like most of the MEV extraction right now is like sex-dex arbitrage, and we see a lot of opportunities that just sort of continue to be uncollected, or arbitrage opportunities that for sometimes Sommelier is in a position to take advantage of. That like just remain open and are like hundreds of millions of dollars of opportunity that just do not get closed across a lot of these different across a lot of these things. So I guess my like takeaway from a liquidity point of view is when you're building cross-chain protocols, it is a little bit of like a step-by-step function where like you add new features, you build new things, liquidity only improves. Maybe you only have like one or two entities that are actually participating in these markets. And hopefully and like we expect all of that will improve over time, but like things are pretty primitive today.
Yeah, I mean, because of like so extensive fragmentation today, these arbitrage opportunities exist a lot, right? Like, so the other day with Socket, there was like a whale which bridged like 30 million between two chains, and we were like figuring out what happened, right? Like, I mean, suddenly one person like just bridging 30 million, and they were just trying to arbitrage between like two dexes on Avalanche and Arbitrum, right? And so they just like were moving massive amounts, and this has like become the norm where like sophisticated market makers have not even started using on-chain security arbitrages. Like, I mean, not even.
Do you know what the asset pair was that they were trying to arbitrage?
No, I just know I don't remember that, but like
Okay.
there's something on Curve and some other decks that basically was happening. Yeah.
I would be curious to see if it was a liquid staking token.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah, actually yeah.
I that would be my guess, but like the liquid staking token market is probably going to be like one of the most interesting cross-chain liquidity environments because it like primarily price discovers across Texas. It doesn't like the trading volumes of liquid staking tokens on centralized exchanges are relatively small.
Yeah, yeah. I think like overall a lot of volumes from DEXs to even bridges might just move to stake ETH and all of these things, right? Like because it just makes sense to have everything
Yeah.
in that way. And then there are like a lot of like low liquidity tokens which are interesting as well. So they exist on let's say Ethereum, but like some of the liquidity now exists on L2, and on L2 because of lack of liquidity, the arbitrage opportunity always exists basically, right?
I mean, there's a funny thing that's happening right now, which is like Neutron and Cosmos is trying to make wrap staked ETH essentially like the money and like the representation of ETH yield on Cosmos. And like Sommelier at least is very interested in making real yield ETH the representation of ETH yield on Osmosis. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Creates a lot of arbitrage opportunities. Who knows what the hell is going to happen?
What are your thoughts, Akshay?
Yeah, so I think currently, of course, as you guys said, cross-chain liquidity is fragmented across multiple ecosystems, not just chains, right? So now Cosmos ecosystem is like, it's fragmented, it's kind of isolated as well. And I feel like the cross-chain liquidity is gonna become more fluid in the future, but it's currently fluid between ecosystems. Currently, it is very fluid inside an ecosystem. Cosmos, like liquidity is amazing right now. You can just like use IBC to just bridge to any chain. And it's kind of like I mean, you know, cross-chain is like the internet moment of blockchain that everybody talks about these days. I think it's true for even internet even these days as well. You know, LAN is faster than like across the globe. The latency is also like very far. Like if I want to send files to somewhere in the US, right? So I think that's gonna probably stay the same, even in terms of blockchains as well. Like Ethereum to Cosmos, yeah, it'll be longer, of course. Like, and of course, inside an ecosystem like Optimism Stack, ZK Stack, like these stacks are gonna have much better fluid, you know, conversions and movement of liquidity through say shared sequences, atomic swaps. So I think like yeah, we are gonna make everything more fluid by building more cross-chain products, cross-chain dexes, of course.
Yeah, I think like because we were talking about latency, I think one other important factor that we've seen is also the cost, right? Like, so what we've observed is once a user goes to a L2 or a cheap chain, like if they go to Osmosis and like see the trading experience there, they never want to touch Ethereum again. They either want to go to like another L2 or from L2 to L2 or like they just want to remain on cheap chains, right? Like, so while everything right now is very optimized for liquidity migration between Ethereum to all of these different chains, I think like that is going to change like a lot, and those dynamics will completely flip between like L2 to L2 or cheap environments, basically.
I mean, I think you guys are like one of the first projects to have really focused on cheap L2 to L2. Like, I mean, it's sort of an incidental part of like things like Squid and everything, but like, and Squid has done a lot of volume on L2 to L2 volume, but like, you definitely hear about like Socket as really like focusing on that use case.
Yeah, 75% of our volumes is actually between L2s. So yeah. But I think like you guys also mentioned like I think you both are using IBC as well as Cosmos, right? Like oh sorry, as well as XLR, right? So what has your experience been building like cross-chain apps with this, right? I think like both of us have been like working with projects like yourself to allow something like things cross-chain apps like these happen. But what has your experience been using like two different um, protocols, if I may say, and yeah, how has the experience been building on them?
Yeah. What's nice is that Axelar is a Cosmos SDK chain. And so actually for Osmosis to talk to Axelar, we only had to use IBC. And so it's nice because Axelar acts like a translator layer for us. And so in that sense, it's been pretty nice. And then, we also have, we at Osmosis added Wormhole now as a second canonical bridge as well. But that's also nice because it is also now a Cosmos SDK chain. And so, I think it's nice that IBC I think will become the standard, at the end of the day, this is how IBC wins, where I think it's going to be the most neutral communication layer. And so even all of these more custom bridge stacks are going to use the Cosmos SDK and IBC as the way of talking between themselves. And so I guess the one thing that has been is I think that IBC has a lot more functionality today than exist on most bridging stacks. So most bridging stacks are very focused on token transfers. IBC has been doing token transfers for years, but you can do a lot more powerful things with IBC today. You can do cross-chain swaps. We have this thing called interchain accounts, where you can have accounts on one chain make transactions on another chain. And that stuff is finally starting to happen in the bridge world now. Like GMP from Accelerator is finally launching, or actually getting proper rollout. So I guess that's where most of the friction has been, is things that we can do with IBC just don't work over Accelerator today. But then eventually I think that stuff will catch up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is a challenge is there is no standard about what layer of the stack different messaging protocols will put different functions and features. So IBC, for instance, has this notion of unordered and ordered channels. So unordered channels, messages are delivered in any order. In ordered channels, they can only deliver in one order. So and depending on your application, those semantics can be really important. You might want to have, and so far we only have those two options in IBC land. You could build another channel where where a more recent message cancels the previous messages. But for GMP, you definitely GMP only has this unordered semantics, and that can lead to really unexpected behavior if for instance you're trying to do a strategist is trying to do a rebalance, and no, they were okay, we're gonna exit these positions, then go into this position, then go into that position. Well, if you reverse the order, financial outcome's not great, right? And so you either get invalid transactions, or you get or you could get sort of unexpected financial outcomes. And so it's taken us a bit longer than I was hoping for us to fully get GMP integrated, because we sort of iteratively discovered working with the Accelerator team where there are these pieces of friction, and had to make changes through and pipe our changes through both our Cosmos side code, our what gets put into IBC, how that IBC stuff then gets translated and received on. So we have smart contract code. The smart contract code has to goes through audits from our EVM expert auditors. We build our Cosmos code, that has to be reviewed. It is not it is definitely not paradise. We're definitely still in the there's somewhere in between, in the internet of blockchains, there's a carrier pigeon that has to carry the messages between them.
Oh, the other one, I think the difference of the experience of using IBC versus other bridges is the permissionlessness of it. With something with all these other bridges, every time we want to add a new chain, we have to go beg the team, be please add this. Here's our business reason why we need this. I've been asking Accelerator and Wormhole to someone please add Tron. We want USDT on Osmosis. But then they have to figure out, they have to go talk to their validators. It's the nice thing about IBC is don't have to ask anyone. It's you make two transactions and you have a bridge between these chains, and that experience has been just really powerful.
Yeah, but how do you scale that beyond Cosmos? Is then that becomes the point, right? For Tron or whatever chains.
Polymer, Union, Composable. There's a bunch of people working on scaling that.
You have any thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the best things about Cosmos is IBC, right? And this standard has been there for almost 2 years now. I don't actually know why, even though IBC is an open source project, I don't know why Acceler or Wormhole or the cross-chain projects building on Cosmos or to Cosmos, they didn't adopt the same model so that, same standard at least, so that, it's easier for the developers of the products, like to build the cross-chain products, it's way better to have standards than just have like multiple interfaces, right?
I think they didn't want to spend 7 years between conception and deployment.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, so I think like that's something we should work towards, because ERC20 standard has made Ethereum so much popular. ERC 721 has made NFTs like blow up and cause the last bull market for us. But yeah, and also like you can have a standard and add features on top as well, right? So ERC 721 has like ERC 721 burnable or receiver or like other standards built on top of that standard. So I'd like to see more cross-chain standards built in the future, maybe by like Socket and LeFi, aggregators.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that people talk about like the ETH L2 ecosystem as sort of learning from Cosmos in many ways. One thing that frustrates me about the ETH L2 ecosystem and not learning from Cosmos is that like no element of the bridge contracts have been standardized. Like the bridges that like the Polygon ZK EVMs work, that the like ZK Sync Sync, the like the Optimism bridge, the Arbitrum bridge, like every single one of them is a completely unique, special snowflakes of a smart contract. Like you could just abstract over like, oh, this is how we do fraud proofs here. You could like stick a no op there for optimism, but like more of these contracts could be more of these contracts could be standardized. And I think both the optimism and the arbitrum contract have had like end-to-end compromises that like were white hat reported, right? So it does that. And it's not like IBC hasn't had bad vulnerabilities. It has, but like it was all the same. Like there was like an entire team of people who like knew what it was. We patched it all before anyone exploited it. It's a very more like standards bring more eyes on the code and like more thinking about like, hey, are these good abstractions? And I think that's definitely a fragility to like the ETH interop ecosystem.
I think like the short to medium run solution will be something like using IBC plus Wormhole plus XLR plus let's say this MMA like thing, right? Like that Uniswap also mentioned, but like not just in the context of hey, I want to bridge something and we just like do a multi-sig of different bridges, but using different things for different environments or whatnot, right? But I think one thing that also comes and that ties back to our liquidity thing is token fragmentation, like what we are seeing on Arbitrum and Optimism, right? Like, I mean, with USDC now there are like 5 different, there are more versions of USDC than there are chains, right? Like, how are you guys thinking about this problem especially when you deal with like multiple GMPs or multiple bridges?
So we built this thing called alloyed assets on Osmosis, where what that means is the canonical. So today, the canonical version of ETH on Osmosis is from Axelar, but now that governance has approved Wormhole as a second canonical bridge, it's like, okay, does that mean now we're gonna have like Wormhole ETH and actual ETH? These are not fungible with each other. So what we're doing is we're making it so we created this new stable swap type, which is, it's basically a constant sum, no slippage, no fees, but with rate limits on how fast the composition of the pool can change. So let's say the pool is made up of, 25% Wormhole, 75% Axelar right now. The goal is it's not going to be those two. It'll also include Polymer and multiple things. And so you should have this like pretty diversified basket. And even if let's say none of them make up more than 20% of the composition, even if one of them gets hacked, it's like it'll be like capped of like, oh, it can only change by max of 10% per 24 hours. And so it'll be like, oh, okay, yes, you lost 22% of the pool's composition, but it's like you diversified your risk across a number of different bridges. But this also gives you this nice like composability where users can pick which bridge they want to use to bring in ETH, and they all get to mint that like single canonical alloyed ETH. And what it doesn't mean to be canonical, it just means that that's what the UI prefers, that's what liquidity incentives prefer, and that's where we're just like building our DeFi economy around these alloyed assets. And what's nice is you can also, not just multiple bridges, but you can also do like multiple source chains as well. So you could say, hey, I want not, as part of this alloyed system, I also allow like wormhole bridged ETH from Arbitrum, or wormhole or Axelar bridged ETH from, you know, ZK Sync, right? Like, so you want to make it so it's as easy as possible for people to bridge their assets from anywhere they are using whatever bridge they want and still get one, you know, I think actually FTX was, a lot of this came from inspiration from that, where like on FTX you could deposit any stablecoin and you just got USD. And I think that was actually a really good experience where you didn't have to worry about which stablecoin it was that you were depositing. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to mimic with this alloyed assets experience.
And so if now like the CCTP or like Circle is coming to Cosmos, so the native USDC basically just gets added to this pool, and ultimately it does not matter where the user or what the user is using.
Yeah, like you know, I imagine that even for if we do the alloyed for USDC, even if it is 95% made up of the native Cosmos USDC, it still makes sense to have some from everywhere else, because we don't know how fast CCTP is going to be deployed, and is it going to be deployed on, you know, if there's 50 OP stack chains, is it CCTP going to be on every single one of those? We don't know, and so let's hedge, and especially for Tether as well, right? Like Tether has no plans of doing anything like CCTP, but we want to make it so like, okay, we have Cosmos native Tether now, but how do we want to make it as easy as possible for people to deposit from Tron or from Ethereum and mint this canonical Tether on Osmosis?
I've been like pretty deeply involved with bringing CCTP to Cosmos. I think people are going to be really excited by like the user experience. It's going to be like it's going to be Cosmos native CCTP. So like you're going to be able to say like I want to bridge from you're going to be able to like say like I want to bridge from Avalanche to Osmosis or DYDX, and you're going to get your Noble USDC minted and delivered to your address on that chain over CCTP and IBC, and the user is not going to have to know anything. I mean, I think like one of the things that we're really aiming for with like Noble's support of DYDX is that like people will bridge into Cosmos and use IBC and use CCTP, use IBC, like compose multiple bridge protocols, and no user will ever have known that had happened. They'll just be like, oh, I wanted to use DYDX. Just wanted to use the exchange.
Yeah, this for the first time, by the way, kind of like also enables this multi-hop experience in bridging, right? Like where you can go from chain A to B to C and get like whatever you need there, right? Like this will be like really.
I mean,
nice.
the work that Squid and Skip and TFM have done, probably like 99% of the usability complaints about Cosmos can be eliminated by going to tfm.com and just like using that. I haven't used the Osmosis like asset page to deposit onto Osmosis in like 3 months. Just use TFM or use like Skip built into Kepler, and it like works much better. Like we're making progress, and like, you know, Squid is finally that user experience that you always wanted, right? Where it's like, oh, I have atoms, I need USDC on, you know, Base, or like I want to use, or like I need ETH on Base to use Friendtech. Like, you know, you just go like, it's like, you know, one click, one signature, and you have your ETH on Friendtech. So like those cross-chain applications are actually like, they actually work the way that like you would want them to work now.
Yeah.
So my thoughts on that is that I think it's natural to have multiple versions of a token on these chains because everyone's competing with each other. They want to have the vendor lock-in. and they want to have most of the TVL of that token through their bridge, right? So I mean, just like how Osmosis is solving it on the application layer through Alloy, I mean, we can also be aiming to. We should also aim to solve this on the application layer by solutions like LeFi or Socket, where you can just like add a widget and then just the developer of the application can choose which version of USDC that they want to support on their platform, and the user just like has to just click on get USDC and just choose the from asset, done, right? So you just like get directly deposit into that smart contract on any L2 chain, for example. So I think I mean like until there's like a standard of or until there's an endorsement by a Circle or any of the stable coin providers, like we don't have an option but to solve it on the application layer, and maybe eventually the endorsement comes and everything shifts over. Yes.
I think so. I think last two questions very quickly. We have like some little time left. So we are all working in cross-chain, right? And I'm sure we are very, very far away from ideal cross-chain experience, and we all feel that, right? So what do you guys think is like the biggest pain point that we need to really overcome to really be in this like chain agnostic paradigm?
I think related to like sort of the intense topic is generally the routing problem. I think the routing problem has been not terribly articulated within the cryptocurrency industry, but basically, so one aspect of the routing problem is I have ETH on chain A, and I need ETH on chain B, and like how do I get there? The classic, I like the most difficult route has always been like I'm on Cosmos, I want to get Solana. That for some reason has been like you have to like go through a jungle, hack your way through, be eaten by a tiger along the way. Been super difficult route. But like we expect users to like somehow discover these routes, and like it's like how the hell are a user going to discover these routes, right? Like discoverability of like routes. What route is capital efficient? Now imagine. Now it gets even worse when you get to the situation where it's like I have this asset. I have Sol. I have Osmo. I have Atom. I have Noble USDC, and I need a different asset. So I need like ETH on base for Frontech. That route, like how the hell do we, and sometimes there's like an aggregator that does a really good job, like Squid, but like route discovery is a huge problem. I don't know that that's ever, like, I think until we get to like the intent-centric future, I don't think that the routing problem will ever be like fully solved.
Intent, I mean, we'll come to intent later maybe, but
I mean, so at least in the EVM side, that's what like we are solving, right? So we are the router, and we find the best route across different bridges, and just like get you the asset that you want to get on any chain on the EVM right now, and we're also expanding to Cosmos soon. But yeah, so like the routing problem is a big problem, of course, in the cross-chain ecosystem. But I think like account abstraction is something that's also gonna help cross-chain a lot better. It's kind of like interchain accounts in Cosmos can be replicated on the EVM side through account abstraction and then cross-chain messaging, so that like you can control your smart contract on a different chain from a different chain, right? So you can also have strategies on EVM, like a app chain can have strategies inside EVM as well. So I think that's one thing that's missing, account abstraction being live on all the EVM chains. Currently there are like a handful of chains like ZK Sync, Arbitrum recently launched, and Ethereum is also live now. So I would say soon. One more thing is that inside these ecosystems, like OP Stack and ZK Stack, especially on the EVM side, we don't have a system like IBC, which is like so seamless, so easy to use for the developers. So I think like once this shared sequencers or like storage proofs, whatever the interop solution gonna be, once they come into picture, we're gonna see more and easy interop inside EVM.
For me, I think one of the biggest challenges or things that we're spending a lot of time focusing on right now on cross-chain future is kind of related to account abstraction. As accounts become more stateful, cross-chain account management is going to become more complicated, because today the UX of an account is accounts are very stateless. They're just a private key held in the wallet. But the future is that it's like, oh no, accounts are actually going to become more stateful. Like as we move towards smart contract wallets, they're going to have like, you know, you're going to have many different keys. You're going to have like different keys with different sort of restrictions on them, and you want these restrictions and stuff to be like coordinated across metal chain. You know, a very simple example. Let's say you have a company and you have a multi-sig, a Gnosis Safe to manage your actions. And you know you needed to change one of your board members. You updated it on Ethereum, but like you have to go remember to update it on every single other chain. And the problem is some of those chains might not even exist yet, right? So your address that you got was based off of the instantiation condition of your Gnosis Safe, but now you've changed it because it's a stateful thing. But now tomorrow, you know, new chain launches, and someone just sees your address and they're like, oh, wait, that's your address on mainnet Ethereum, but hey, I'm going to send you some money on ZK Sync. They send it to that address, and that's filled with a bunch of like old board members that don't actually exist anymore, and now it's like you can't access those funds, right? So and so I think the interchain accounts is like the solution. That's kind of what we're doing with Osmosis right now, like trying to make Osmosis be the account hub for, we're already the liquidity hub for Cosmos, make it now be the account hub for Cosmos, where, okay, we're going to build the most powerful account abstraction framework into the Osmosis chain, but then if you want to do actions on other chains, you can do those over interchain accounts.
Yeah, I think like you guys covered like most of it, but like for me, like I think infra generally, right? I got developer tooling in general. Like I mean, there are handful of RPC providers that actually support 30 chains, for example, right? Like so, how do you even like access RPCs? Like these wallet addresses problem, right? Like is a huge one, and like there's like this, and because developers right now are used to building in like this atomic environment, and now everything becomes like asynchronous where like you have finality on one chain and only then you can transact on the other chain. This is something that people are not used to, at least like for the dApps that we are building right now, right? Like so all of these will require like a lot of research or maybe like a lot of experiments to basically get there. I think like last question, I think intents maybe, right? Like, so what do you think intents will, how will intents really contribute to this cross-chain apps or cross-chain products, right? Maybe like, Zaki, do you want to maybe like just give like a 5-year-old explanation on intents for everyone?
Yeah. Okay. So the conceptual model of an intent is basically that a user ties a payment to an outcome. So they're like, I have this much money and I want 500 Pepe in this wallet address on Ethereum. Okay. And from a user's point of view now, what chain they have, they've locked up, the money on for that payment becomes a little bit of a thing that they don't really have to think too much about. And they just are trying to achieve an effect. And so an effect might be, mint DAI, an effect might be mint IST, an effect might be swap A for B. And until now, like what we've been basically trying to do at the UI layer is like with these aggregators and everything is trying to like guide a user to figure out what execution trace they have to sign over to actually accomplish that goal. And it's a pretty hard problem to like come to a complete solution with. I mean, stuff like Wi-Fi is good. It definitely helps users in a lot of circumstances. But like one of the things about these routes that's really hard is that market conditions change the routes. So like swapping through Uniswap might be really safe, but then like one day USDC depegs and like all of the USDC liquidity is on curve. And if you only support Uniswap in your user interface, your user gets wrecked. And so having this routing infrastructure also be market aware, that becomes like an even harder problem. And now you kind of get into this idea of, okay, what if instead of having this architecture of like trying to help a user find like how to specify the user trace, we actually create like essentially like an order book for this, like an order book of states. And like specialists who have the expertise to know like the solvers, this like solver class of expert users of blockchains who are like tracking all of the like liquidity, depth, market across like many different venues, can suddenly just come in and be like, okay, like here is your Pepe. We took care of the MEV. We like dealt with the MEV. We captured the MEV. We like found the best venue. We traded. We got the best price. Like all of that got taken care of. And that was sort of specialists doing it rather than like trying to build software that can like look at all of this information that like a specialist would look at, and which seems to be like somewhat intractable.
Are you guys thinking about intents?
Yeah, no, I've been reading up on its intents as well. I've been following Zaki, especially like in his talks and panels as well. So intents, like I mean, I see I think about the challenges of implementing intents on these EVM chains or across all chains as well, which is that how do you validate an intent, right? So that's like the biggest problem that I think that's the biggest missing piece I see. So of course, like you can validate on chain, like how Swap does validation on chain to just like solve intents, and Uniswap X is also gonna do validation on chain, but Uniswap X is gonna do cross chain validation as well. So I think that's where cross chain messaging, cross chain infrastructure is gonna help us there. So yeah, I think like going forward, we are gonna see so many more projects building on intents, solving intents, intent marketplaces. Like atomic intents. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this.
I'll give a little bit of a more contrarian take on this then, which is I think that like yes, I think intents solve like for a very like utilitarian use case of like, hey, I have this here, I want to get here, figure out the complicated thing to do that. But I do think most trading volume is mostly just from like speculative trading. And I think that intents are not actually very good for that purpose, mostly because, I don't think users are actually good at like specifying their outcomes. They just want to take directional claims on the world. And, that's why most normal traders make market orders, not limit orders. Limit orders are basically intents, but it's like, I don't know what I think the real value of Bitcoin is. I just think it's lower than it should be, and I'm going to make a market order to buy it right now. And then also like, overly or I had this like, that like Twitter standing up guy meme. I had one where it's like order books are intent matching engines, and they're just like very efficient intent matching engines, right? You take a bunch of limit orders and market orders, and you in a high-powered exchange, you care a lot about performance, and having like arbitrary intent like programs is like, you're just going to lose so much performance. While, if you restrict the types of intents people can make to these like things like limit orders, stop orders, market orders, we'll give you, if we can construct the few types of intents that satisfy 99% of users, you can get so much more performance benefits in just designing a really powerful order book. And then finally, you get these like fairness properties as well, where it's like, if you care a lot about like privacy and like, the thing with the intent system is like, oh, the solvers are basically going to be capturing all the MEV. But when you use like on-chain order books with like things like threshold decryption, it's actually you can, save the MEV and give it back to the traders themselves rather than having to leak it to these people to solve your intents problems for you. So yeah, when you care a lot about this like fairness properties and privacy and performance, I do think most trading volume is still going to stay on CLOB-style systems rather than intent systems.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we can have like another 1 hour panel on intent. So, but like I think a good time to maybe end this one for now. So yeah, thank you so much, guys.